is a delightful beverage that gets its flavor from several sources, the most prominent being malted barley. From cracker and white bread to toasty and ashy, malt is arguably the main reason so many beer styles exist today. The term specialty malt is used to describe a subsect of malts that undergo differing treatments in order to accentuate specific characteristics that are quite noticeable despite their relatively low usage rates. You're listening to the Brewlosophy Podcast. I'm your host, Marshall Schott, and today I am joined by contributor Will Lovell to chat about one such specialty malt that goes by the name Victory Malt.
Other than having a really, really cool name, because who doesn't want to have victory? I mean, that just sounds like the absolute best. It is one of those things that is kind of like, a behind the scenes that, who doesn't want toasty, nutty, or biscuit flavors in the background of most of their beers? Because Lord knows I do. So I'm really excited to talk about Victory Malt today and, maybe where it can and can't be used and how much impact it may or may not have.
Yeah. When I moved to all grain brewing over 15 years ago, for whatever reason, I latched on to Victory Malt. I'm assuming it was because something I heard from somebody that I trust, was talking about. Anyway, I was happy with the results and just presumed that Victory Malt had something to do with, my happiness with these beers. So I just kept using it. Just look at some of my recipes online. Tiny Bottom Pale Ale, there's a decent charge of Victory Malt, Was it actually having that impact, though? That's a question you aim to shed some light on, Will, with an experiment that you did. We're going to be getting into that later in this show. If you're a fan of this show and you'd like to receive a reward for your support, please consider becoming a patron of Brewlosophy over at patreon.com/Brewlosophy, where you make a small pledge and receive rewards like access to unpublished contributor recipes, unique perks from YakimaValleyHops.com, and an invitation to a monthly live brew day with a Brewlosophy contributor. I just hosted my first brew day this weekend. It was my first brew day in the new brewery. And we had anywhere from about, 10 to 12 people coming in and out of the chat and asking questions and just kind of kicking it with me. A lot of fun. They seem to have it as well. If you'd like to join something like that, head over to patreon.com/Brewlosophy. You can check out all of the rewards we offer for your support. Again, that's patreon.com/Brewlosophy. Huge thanks to all of our patrons for helping us to keep producing this show. And if you wouldn't mind leaving a rating and review of our show in Apple Podcast or wherever it is you listen to podcasts that allows you to do that, we'd appreciate that too, as it makes us easier to find for those who may not have heard of us yet. Thanks again to everybody who has taken the time to do that. Feedback is brought to you by Clawhammer Supply, who I am convinced are doing perhaps more than any other company out there to keep this hobby alive, whether that's making awesome brewing and beer-related videos for their YouTube channel or continuing to improve on already great brewing gear, even spreading the love by sponsoring outfits like us. We appreciate all of it and completely stand by our promotion of their products. We love everything that Clawhammer offers brewers, like various options for high-quality, reasonably priced electric brewing rigs and various voltages and sizes. I've used their 120 and 240 volt systems. They're awesome. Clawhammer Supply really does put the effort into ensuring their systems do exactly as they are intended to do in as efficient a way as possible. And if you're not ready to make the jump to electric just yet, they also sell 10 and 20 gallon brew in a bag homebrewing starter kits. Whatever it is you're looking for, do yourself a favor and visit clawhammersupply.com. We're confident you're going to love their stuff just as much as we do. Listener and patron Seth Vogel wrote in with some interesting information after hearing us talk about, an interesting ingredient. Seth said, I vowed myself to write the next time Martin and Marshall talked about fish bladder in English brewing. Lo and behold, it was Will talking about it this time. I hold my vow fulfilled, though I don't know if I'm adding to the fun or bursting bladder bubbles. Some listeners may be imagining bits of tiny urinary bladders floating around in beer, somehow gathering up the hazy bits. Fish do not have a urinary bladder. Their paired kidneys produce dilute urine that is continuously excreted. There is no need for these marine creatures to store urine when they can just swim around in it. Isinglass is actually made from the swim bladder, a gas-filled organ fish use to achieve neutral buoyancy at various depths of water. Collagen-rich material is processed in a way similar to the production of gelatin. The positively charged collagen grabs negatively charged beer particles, such as haze positive proteins and yeast, until increasing density drops them out of solution. The only difference is that gelatin, it's less funny. Thanks to all of you. Thanks for all you guys do. Looking forward to the release of Brewlosophy branded bladder extract. Will, you and I have spent quite a lot of time talking about fish bladder, isinglass. What are your thoughts on what Seth shared with us here?
So it is kind of less fun to think about that, but I am going to take this opportunity to say cloaca on the podcast because that is the common entry-exit point that fish use for both excreting their urine and poop, and also their shared reproductive organs kind of come in and out of there as well. So we'll talk about cloaca since we're getting the fish anatomy here, and it's a fun word to say. So just to keep that from your preschooler from saying too much at preschool about it. But yeah, so I guess I kind of always, when we hear bladder, he is right. Like when you hear bladder, you think of a mammalian bladder that does hold urine. But there are fish bladders that are more like of an air bladder where they just kind of puff up air and go down the air. And I guess secretly I always knew that, although it is more fun to kind of lean towards the more disgusting part. But either way, whether you're using collagen from fish bladder or collagen from bits of cow or horse, I guess it's all collagen in the end, and it all gets it done. So thanks for writing in. That's kind of a fun topic, and you allowed me to say cloaca on air, so I really appreciate that.
Yeah. Look, I wholly agree that fish bladders are funnier than gelatin, at least to talk about in the context of beer. I genuinely love when people share info like this with us. What you're saying, Seth, makes sense to me. I did not know that, so this is kind of a TIL moment. But it's not that. I don't know how I would have known this without like specifically looking into it. So very interesting information. Thank you so much for sharing it with us. I'm not sure how it's going to impact my daily living, except for maybe we won't view isinglass in the funny light that we have been, but it's still fun to talk about. So all right, Seth, thanks again for the feedback. If you have show feedback, you can send it to feedback@brulosophy.com or drop us a note on social media. Make sure to pick up your Brulosophy merch over at brulosophy.com/shop. We're offering more options than we ever have before, from t-shirts, hoodies, and hats to fanny packs, shorts, coffee mugs, and so much more. We have done our best to keep prices reasonable, and international shipping is now available. Again, you can head to brulosophy.com/shop and click one of the product images on that page, which will redirect you to our Dashery store, or you can just go directly there, brulosophy.dashery.com, a link of which we put in the description of this episode.
We all know that designing recipes is really fun, and doing it well is so much easier with good software. We at Brulosophy recently made the switch to Brewfather, and honestly, y'all, we could not be happier. Brewfather utilizes the latest technology to bring you the most robust cloud-based recipe design software that can be accessed anywhere, on your phone, tablet, desktop, and even offline. It also works seamlessly with numerous third-party devices to make it easier to monitor every step of your brew. I know change can be difficult, but trust me when I say you need to go to brewfather.app today to try it out for yourself. That's brewfather.app.
Of the myriad adjectives used to describe beer, one I feel most drinkers tend to be okay with is biscuity, which is a vague term that still alludes to something we can all relate to, and at least in my way of thinking about it. Obviously, this characteristic is malt derived, and while base malts contribute biscuity notes kind of on their own, certain specialty malts have been developed to really emphasize this biscuity quality. One of which is Victory Malt.
Yeah, Victory Malt is actually kind of a neat thing because it's kind of Briess's retort to another malt that's made overseas. And so in the 90s, Briess, at the request of brewers, decided to look into making something that would give a unique flavor profile that was kind of going to be modeled after that biscuit-style malt that they used in Europe for so long. And so... again, you get some of those nice biscuit malt kind of flavor profiles, biscuity, toasty, nutty. When I think of biscuity, I literally am we were just at a thing this weekend where there was a guy out there and he was doing kind of a cook-off like from a trail cart. So like he had kind of a Dutch oven out there making homemade biscuits in his Dutch oven, and they would give you free samples of this like made over the fire Dutch oven biscuits, and you could just, take a bite of the biscuit. And again, that kind of like nice floury biscuity characteristic that you get from eating that biscuit, like in some of those lighter beer styles, like, man, why wouldn't you want that even in darker beer styles? So I could see why people really wanted to get that kind of biscuity flavor in there. And it just, again, it makes me think of just that guy at his chuck wagon over the weekend providing me with delicious biscuits and my family to try. So that's pretty awesome. So they made this whole competition here to get that kind of biscuity European flavor, but from a domestic supplier.
Yeah, here's the thing, and we're focusing on a single malt here. There's not much depth that we can get into, but I do think one of the fascinating things about these biscuit style malts is what I said earlier, that it's kind of a vague description, right? I only learned a few years ago. I feel so dumb about this, by the way. When I hear biscuit, I think the same thing you do. Those nice, fluffy, Southern biscuits, chuckwagon biscuits, and that smell of like warm white dough bread. I make sourdough. That is a biscuity smell when I'm baking a loaf of sourdough. Like that is where my brain goes, and I do get that in several malts. Like I said earlier, I get that in base malt, but Victory Malt and Biscuit Malt, which we're going to be talking about both of those together a lot in this episode. Those are both. To me, they do have the idea behind them, at least, is that you're going to use those to really emphasize that quote biscuit note. Well, what I learned, I had been commenting, on the show and on the website about this biscuit character, yada yada, for years, and somebody from England. I believe they were from England, sends me an email and they were like, when you say biscuit, are you sure we're talking about the same thing? Over here, biscuits they're like little tea crackers, like the Biscoff, Do you know what I'm talking about? The Biscoff, you can get them on like airplanes sometimes.
I mean, they call biscuits cookies there too. So but I mean, I don't know that you get to me, there's like so much of a sugary thing, but it could be crackers, like cracker. To me, like a kind of a crackery type biscuit versus like a, chuckwagon biscuit have very similar qualities as far as like some of those similar kind of Maillard reactions going in there. It's just less butter, probably, would be the main difference.
You just make a 100% Victory Malt thing with diacetyl in it, and you've got like biscuits and with butter on it, right?
Oh, man. Yeah. And then whatever gravy additive we can throw in there to have our biscuit and gravy beer would be fantastic.
Make it a hazy IPA with a whole bunch of Victory Malt, and you've got your biscuits and gravy. That'd be a funny name for a beer, but
it would never sell. It would never sell.
Well, it would to some people. There are folks out there who love weird stuff like that. But I just wanted to get that distinction out there up front, because I'm not sure how, when they Biscuit Malt that is technically a Belgian malt. Are they referring to biscuits like you and I think about them, or when they call it a biscuit malt, are they talking about the cracker or the cookie? Either way, we are, there's a widely held belief, at least, that these types of malts impart a very warm, bready, biscuity, crackery character to beer. Can we at least agree on that overall, that's what biscuit style malts are, right?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, I think we can basically agree on that. And then, and so again, since Victory is Brice's version, we're going to obviously be comparing biscuit from company, a UK company, or maybe Dingman to say Brice's Victory Malt, which seems to be a fair comparison. And they seem to have separate production styles as well. So European biscuit is toasted for a relatively short period of time, and then Victory Malt is dried. It's drum roasted and kiln dried at a somewhat cooler temperature over a longer period of time, and so while they are pretty similar, they do seem to come from a little bit different backgrounds. We talked about some of the flavors, like again, Victory, usually you say nutty, toasty, like fresh baked bread, maybe more like a biscuit.
Like
American
we think
biscuit.
of a biscuit. Yeah, exactly.
And then maybe Biscuit Malt is said to contribute like a warm biscuit, maybe a UK biscuit or European biscuit, and saltine cracker flavors to beer, which those seem to have a lot of overlap, obviously, right? Like freshly baked bread and saltine cracker, there's a lot of overlap in flavors depending on the bread and the cracker. So
yeah.
So they seem to be pretty on point. But Victory is a touch darker than Biscuit at 28 Lavabon versus 18 degrees Lavabon. So you might get a little more orange highlight out of your Victory than your Biscuit, but that's okay. I think there's enough room for all this.
Yeah, something in thinking about the differences between Victory Malt and Biscuit Malt, the easiest thing in my mind, at least, and we're the ones who make these show notes, so that's why we focus on it, is the way that they're made. I mean, it's the way that different crystal malts are made have purportedly have an impact on the way that they end up impacting beer. Something I feel that doesn't get very much attention, though, is it very rarely in my experience gets even talked about, is the actual like species of barley that's being used. Not just whether it's 2-row or 6-row, but is it Chevalier? Is it some other type of barley? I don't know. Is Dingemans using, their production of Biscuit Malt is slightly different. Same concept, right? But the way they go about getting their Biscuit Malt kilned and dried and all of that is a little bit different than the way Brice does. And that could have, arguably does have some sort of an impact on the overall character that malt is going to contribute to beer. But does the actual type of barley being used make a difference as well? I mean, you look at base malts like Maris Otter. Maris Otter is the name of that barley. It's not the processing necessarily, of that pale malt. But it's different. People recognize, Maris Otter, it's got this nice peanutty kind of flavor or whatever. That is different than, a Rar Two-Row pale malt or whatever. And so, I don't know. I think that's interesting. Do you have any thoughts on like the not just the way that they're produced as having a contribution to their flavor characteristics, but also the type of barley? I mean, I feel like that's worthy of attention.
So I'm actually on the Dingman's website right now because I kind of pulled it up before we got started, because whenever I think of like European malting, like Dingman's is pretty front of mind.
Yeah.
And a lot of like things that got me using Biscuit and or Victory early on was like the use and potential usage in Belgian beers to get more of that kind of cracker note to it. But they definitely do use a European winter barley variety. At least that's what I'm translating from this Flemish that's on their website, because even the variety is in Flemish, and so I'm not very good with my Flemish or my Dutch. So, but it is kind of a winter barley variety is what it looks like, and so that I'm very certain that variety, even just based on terroir, growing it in Europe, even if you grew the exact same variety here in the Americas, it would have a different flavor just due to terroir and soil and all that stuff as well, if it would even grow. So I would think that there has to be some kind of difference as far as terroir and soil, variety. I don't know, once you start kilning them to 28 degrees Lavabon or 18 degrees Lavabon, how much of that can you actually get through? Because I know Maris Otter, again, we talked about that earlier, that is a paler malt. And so you would think that those paler malts, you might be able to tell a little more difference because of the lower kilning level versus something that gets a lot darker. Because even when we've done like crystal versus caramel malts, we don't seem to be able to discern those quite as well. So versus, some lower Lavabon stuff like doing pale malt versus Maris Otter. So I wonder if the kilning might kind of obfuscate the differences in the actual barley varieties or not.
Yeah, that's interesting. As a bread maker, I don't mean to go down that rabbit hole, but I usually stick to just one type of flour. I get King Arthur bread flour. It works great for me. I have my process down, whatever. But I mean, that is 100% of the quote fermentables, right? In a loaf of bread, if you're making it that way. I wonder now, like if I were to get some other brand's bread flour, would it actually have a different flavor? Yeah, I mean, I would assume that if it did, that if terroir or if the style of barley, or wheat mattered, where it was grown and all that you would taste it in bread. I don't know. I've never noticed much of a difference.
And also different breads, like so King Arthur versus like maybe your local grocery store bread, they have different protein contents as well. So you're playing with a whole myriad of variables, probably going between different brands of bread flour. Not that I want to go down that rabbit hole with you, but obviously we've both gone down that rabbit hole just a little bit, to talk about proteinaceous content in bread flours. Again, not something I thought I'd be talking about today. Cloaca and proteinaceous content of bread flours. There we are. Wild day.
But here's the thing. Biscuit malt. Biscuit is a type of bread, at least in my way of thinking about it. And so to me, it's like they're very closely aligned, right? The new term that I hear these youngsters using is whatever the topic is, adjacent. And I feel like bread is very beer adjacent. So now, in thinking about, again, the flavor differences between Biscuit Malt and Victory Malt, the only reason we're focusing on Biscuit Malt is because Victory was designed as an emulation of Biscuit Malt. There are other malts that, if you Google it, that the Google AI will spit out like similar ones. Like what's another one I read about? It wasn't made as an emulation of Biscuit Malt necessarily, but you can use small amounts of, what is it? It's another Belgian malt. Anyways, it's not a crystal malt. It's just a different specialty malt. I forget which one it was, and I don't want to misquote what I read. But the other thing, though, is the fact that Victory Malt, I believe, is more consistently kilned to between 25 and 28 degrees Lavabon, whereas Biscuit Malt, that designation, you can find Biscuit Malts that are as low as about 15 degrees Lavabon and upwards of about 28 degrees Lavabon. So that's a much wider range than what Briess is making for Victory Malt. Obviously, they're just one maltster making Victory Malt. That's their branded version of Biscuit Malt. So in my mind, at least, if there's going to be a difference, it could also just be because one of them is darker, more kilned or roasted than the other one.
Right, and I think you're just you gave me a second to think about it. I think aromatic malt maybe or amber malt might be what you're thinking about.
I think it was aromatic, but I didn't want to say that.
Aromatic seems like a very similar one. I'll say it. Like I'll be the idiot.
I just don't want people taking it the wrong way.
Yeah. So again, and so one of the things also that kind of seems to differ between Biscuit and Victory, not by a ton, but like is usage percentage. Like if you look at Dingman's website, they usually say 30% is kind of where they cap out their max usage percentage for this. I've seen some other websites for different varieties that say 10%, whereas Bree seems to think you can go all the way up to 25% pretty easily. So 25, 30%, I guess they're pretty similar, but again, usage might vary. Kind of my sweet spot that I've used it the most is that 2 to 10% range.
Yeah.
Honestly, like kind of the way I think about it is like there was, and again, I think it's probably because I read a magazine somewhere and they're like, yeah, if you put like a 2 to 10, like a 5% or so contribution of Victory Malt, if you, no matter what kind of quality of Pilsner malt you're using, whatever, you can still get that kind of crackery, bready bread crust kind of character underneath there, even if, to kind of accentuate what you should be getting from your Pilsner malt, but just a way to accentuate that even out a little bit further. So that's kind of where I've used it. I have done, maybe not Victory, but I have done just as an experiment before Brewlosophy, where I did a 50% biscuit malt beer, and I do not recommend that. It was not very good, but it was not very good. So
what did it taste like? Now you got me hooked. Now what was it like?
Honestly, I don't know if it was the malt or something, but it just tasted so over the top, funky, like biscuit character that like it just was not enjoyable to me. And then I think there was also a touch of astringency that happened in that beer for some reason. And I just since then have gone back to much lower usage rates of Biscuit or Victory Malt. In fact, I think I moved over to Victory Malt because I was so tainted of the Biscuit Malt name after that I kind of like moved away.
Oh, I've got a similar reason that I stuck with Victory and not Biscuit. I'll get into that in a minute, but I'm with you. Common usage rates, if you pair Biscuit Malt and Victory Malt together, you're looking anywhere between 2 to 25%. Again, that's a pretty vast range. I believe for most of my recipes, I was wholly convinced that 5%, give or take, was the sweet spot. Like you don't want to overdo it for the reasons that you're saying about, that experimental batch. You're gonna create this almost cloyingly bready, to the point that it might not even taste bready or biscuity anymore. Characteristic that doesn't sound very pleasant. But I don't think I've ever used more than like 8% Victory Malt. If I've used Biscuit Malt, I don't remember using it.
Well, that's just kind of sad since that was the OG, but whatever. I am curious. So here, sometime we're on the website that you see up to 15% where they say that it'll add like a nice biscuit backbone to like amber red and brown ales. I would be curious to see, because again, you get that color contribution from Victory especially, and a little bit from Biscuit to get that kind of orangey color. So I would be kind of curious in an amber or red to get up to 15% and see if that actually could be kind of sleuthed out. But 25% in a porter just seems like it would be strange. Like, I don't know. How much biscuit do you want in your porter? I'm thinking more I want roasty, maybe some caramel malt in there to get some caramel character. But like 25% seems like a lot. But maybe in the English porter, you put in a pretty good chunk of it, and it turns out all right. But that would be very curious to me to see if you could sleuth out the Victory or the biscuit malt in kind of those darker styles, and it wouldn't get so obfuscated by the darker malts like your roasted barley or something like that. So that would be very interesting to me. But yeah, don't do 50%. It's a bad idea.
Well, at least with Biscuit Malt, we have to test that out with Victory now.
Oh.
Yeah, I think about one of the first times I ever had a mild ale from England. Somebody had brought one back after a trip, shared it with our homebrew club, and I remember just thinking, man, this is bready. Like that flavor that I'm getting here is bready, and I was convinced it was Victory Malt or Biscuit Malt, one of the two. Because in my, I'd used Maris Otter, I had used pale malts hundreds of times, and I'm drinking this beer going, I know how Mild's made. There's no way they're getting this level of breadiness with just Maris Otter. You know what I mean? And maybe now I'm thinking back, maybe it was some brown malt or something like that. But they're interesting ingredients. Now we're gonna move away from talking about ales because in the experiment we're gonna get to in the next segment, you focused on Festbier, which I think is a really good style for testing this type of a variable out. Right, the impact something like Victory Malt has because of it being a pale lager. There's really not much else to get in the way. The BJCP describes Festbier as a smooth, clean, pale German lager with a moderately strong malty flavor and a light hop character. Deftly balances strength and drinkability with a palate impression and finish that encourages drinking. It showcases elegant German malt flavors without becoming too heavy or filling. Let's talk a little bit about what we might expect from a Festbier made with Victory Malt.
So in my head, again, from reading various articles from various brewing publications, in my head, adding kind of a 5% Victory Malt in a lager is going to make sure that I get kind of that cracker, toasty bread crust flavor that I want, probably coming mostly from the Pilsner malt, but hopefully it would accentuate that a little bit more and kind of that low percentage. And so, and Oktoberfest does come around once a year, every year. So having a Festbier on tap that time of year is never a bad idea, in my opinion. And so really, just trying to accentuate that crackery, bread doughy, bread crusty kind of thing, biscuit character, in a German style lager is really what I was thinking I would go for. And that's really my use case that I've had for a lot of my beers in the past is just that 5% range, 4-5% range. And so really it's kind of testing my own bias here of whether or not this Victory Malt is actually making a difference or if it's just all in my head.
Yeah, when I think of Festbier, my brain goes to kind of a more malty, slightly stronger. I think those two are one and the same, actually. I think it's, you get more malty because you're using more malt to make it stronger. So it makes sense to me that like a breadier, biscuity flavor characteristic would work with that style. And what I meant was a more malty, stronger version of like a Helles, right? There's also a part of me though that's like, how malty does it need to be? I mean, I guess there are people out there who would really want to like boost that aspect of a Festbier. But again, at whatever usage rate, as long as you're going with what's recommended by the maltster, I would think that you would taste Victory Malt in a Festbier regardless of how it's made, because you are adding this malt sold as having some sort of an impact. Now, one of the very first craft beers I recall ever drinking, I can't wait to hear your thoughts on this one, was New Belgium's Fat Tire Ale. And I just turned 21. I met up with some friends at a local sports bar up in Bellingham, Washington, where they had a really good deal on, it was like a college town. So pitchers of this popular amber ale were like $5, right? And so we were just going there and playing pool and drinking tons of this stuff. I loved it, at least at the beginning, but within a few months, I found myself like shying away from more than one pint because this biscuit flavor was so damn intense, and to the point like it would make me not want to have another drink that wasn't water. I felt like I had to wash it out of my mouth. It's not that I didn't enjoy it. Again, it was just more so pungent that it was difficult to get more than one pint down for me. Well, because of this, when I transitioned from extract to all grain a few years later, I went with Victory Malt, and that was, I'd heard people talking about it being a substitution for biscuit malt, and I thought maybe that's where I need to lean into, because that biscuit malt flavor was just so strong in Fat Tire. Were you a Fat Tire drinker at all in your beer drinking history?
So I remember drinking Fat Tire, and I remember thinking it's okay. I don't remember loving Fat Tire. I just remember it being different. And I didn't know that it was different good. There were other kind of amber beers at the time that I really liked, more amber ales than probably anything else, amber lagers and some of that stuff. But I just remember that for whatever reason, Fat Tire had kind of a weird taste to it that I didn't care for, that I didn't get in other amber beers. So I remember it. It's been a really long time since I ever drank it, and I never really. I'm not a big. This is probably terrible for me to say. I'm not a huge New Belgium fan as much as I like Belgian beers.
Well, they don't really focus on too many Belgian styles, but I will tell you this. If you were to go to the store right now and buy a 12-pack of Fat Tire, it's a different recipe. I picked one up, I don't know, a couple years ago, and their branding was different. The logo was different. and the beer tasted entirely different. It was way less biscuity, and it actually, if my memory serves, it was like more pale colored than it was amber. Very interesting. Either way, I was using Victory Malt. I was pleased enough with those results that I've continued to use it. I don't buy biscuit malt. I always keep Victory Malt on hand. That said, my usage rate is generally fairly low, which has left me wondering just how much of an impact it is actually having in my beers. Well, you were curious enough about this topic to test it out for yourself, and you designed an experiment. We're going to get to those results when we're back from this break. There's no denying that stainless steel is the best material for brewing equipment, and Delta Brewing Systems offers some of the lowest prices on high-quality stainless gear, like the Firm Tank, which in addition to holding 8 gallons or 30 liters of work, comes with a domed lid to even further reduce the chances of a messy blow-off. Plus, it can hold up to 4 psi of pressure for closed transfers. Delta Brewing Systems also has their own line of brew kettles, as well as one of the lowest-priced all-in-one electric brewing systems out there, and their prices are shockingly low. If you're in the market for legit stainless gear that won't break the bank, do yourself a favor and head over to deltabrewingsystems.com today. Out of curiosity, and because I only just got back into brewing after a sadly long hiatus, I reviewed several of my house recipes and found that when I use Victory Malt, it's almost always between 4 to 5% of the grist. That's around 8 ounces or 227 grams in a 5-gallon batch. As convinced as I've been that this matters, you performed an experiment that could cause me to question my convictions. Tell us about that one, Will.
Oh, yeah. So I decided to design an experiment where I used Festbier, and just a spoiler alert, it was around Oktoberfest time, which is why I wanted to make a Festbier. I quite enjoy the style. And so, but again, my Festbier, my house Festbier recipe usually calls for a 4 or 5% charge of Victory Malt. And so I was curious to see what this does. And so I designed I made 2 5-gallon or 19-liter batches of Festbier. In the first batch, I had 89% Pilsner malt plus 11% Munich malt. And then in my second batch, I did 84% Pilsner malt, 11% Munich malt, and then that other last 5% was reserved for some Victory Malt. Again, just to kind of emulate that small percentage that I usually put in my house Festbier to see if there really is a flavor impact there.
Well, so here's the thing. I already know that people are going to hear this and say, why did you even do Munich malt? It should have just been Pilsner malt. I don't think you and I disagree with that concept. But at the same time, most people out there are using Victory Malt in this exact way. They're adding it along with other malts, not just base malt, with the belief, that is, or the conviction, that it's having some meaningful impact on the flavor characteristics of that beer. So to me, there's nothing wrong with this. Could we have been more clinical about it? Maybe. But I like this because you're taking a house recipe that you are very familiar with and you're adding 5% Victory Malt, a very common usage rate. It's all I've ever done. I don't think I've ever gone higher than 8% at max is the closest I could find. So to me, this all makes sense. People are going to complain. I get that, and that's okay.
Yeah, but again, seasonality of brewing, and we could have done it in a German Pilsner, and we could complain about the hopping rates. I mean, I guess we could have done it in a Helles, and we could have complained about some other variable that we didn't attend to. And so the reality is that no matter, there are more styles to explore this in, but this is one that I was wholeheartedly convinced that I needed that kind of more biscuity character inside of my Festbier. And so that's the reason it's there, is to get it a little bit more of that oomph for that biscuity character inside of this kind of malt forward beer that can be dominated by some of that Munich malt in there as well. So that's kind of the reason why. But yeah, obviously more room to explore regardless of outcome. But it's fair. It's all fair criticism. But it was Oktoberfest, so cut me some slack. So brewing process, I did a single infusion mash at 152 Fahrenheit or 67 Celsius for 1 hour. When the mash was complete, I removed the grains and I boiled for 60 minutes. At 60 minutes, I added 24 grams of perlé. At 30 minutes, another 17 grams of perlé. And then, not to be too singular, at the last 5 minutes, I put in 31 grams, just over an ounce of Sots. And I will say, after doing a Hop Chronicles Perlé Pale Lager here fairly recently, I might have just gone all Perlé if I did this again today, because that hop is actually the bomb.
I love it. Yeah, I use Perlé in my Tiny Bottom Pale Ale. It was completely just, I had it on hand, threw some in, and I don't know exactly how big of an impact it has on that beer recipe, but man, I do love that hop. It's a good one.
So after I was done with the boil, I chilled both worts and then put equal volumes from those batches into identical Delta Firm Tank fermenters, I believe. Was I using the Delta Firm Tank back then? Oh, yep, I was definitely using the Delta Firm Tanks. And so when I got to the end, refractometer read no Victory was at a 1056 OG, and then Victory was at a 1055 OG. So pretty close for doing two batches side by side, if you ask me.
Yeah, and it's one specific gravity point different. That's not notable. Some people might think it is. I am wholly convinced that doesn't matter. It could just be measurement error. But it also doesn't surprise me that the one that had more Pilsner malt was the one that had a slightly higher OG. Victory Malt, I don't think, is known for being terribly, it's not a hot malt or anything like that. It is a specialty malt. So that one OG difference might be explained by the variable, but I don't think that's not going to be what's going to make these beers taste any different.
Yeah, I think the extra kilning that the Victory Malt goes up to versus Pilsner Malt definitely probably reduces some of the fermentability that you're going to get out of using it. But again, at 5% rate, one OG gravity point, I'm pretty happy with that anytime I'm brewing side-by-side batches that are identical if they're within one specific gravity point. So I'll take it here where there's just a little bit of a difference. The fermenters were attached to a glycol unit where I finished chilling everything down to my fermentation temperature of 66F or 19C. And then I went on to pitch a single pouch of Imperial Yeast L17 Harvest, which is the Augustiner strain. And I know I'll probably get a little bit of flack for the 66F, but I've honestly done Harvest at that temperature at a lot of times. I've made some award-winning beers doing it. So I'm gonna keep doing it until somebody tells me that there's a really negative effect, and they do tell me that, but I still keep doing it.
I was going to say, yeah, people tell us that all the time. Yeah,
but it's delicious. So trust me, try it if you haven't. So after about 8 days, fermentation appeared to have been done. So I took some hydrometer measurements, and lo and behold, they finished out at right around the same point, about a 1.009 final gravity, which again doesn't really surprise me. They're within a gravity point, up ahead, and so the fact that they both finished out at about 10.09 FG, that's not very surprising to me either.
No, that's freaking great for a 1056, 1055 OG Festbier, in my opinion. Nice and dry. I'll take it.
Yeah, exactly. So I cold crashed, put the beers in CO2 purge kegs, left them on gas for 3 weeks before they were served to tasters, and so now we can look and see with our eyes the objective appearance difference and see if that 5% of Victory Malt seemed to have created anything. And honestly, maybe the Victory Malt is a hint darker,
but
it's like you're kind of looking at them, and again, it's kind of the angle of the photo, and man, that stupid photographer, I don't know what he was thinking, but when I took the photo, I don't really remember seeing that much of a difference. And now that I'm staring at them in the photo, some months later, like again, there's not that great of a difference. It might be a touch darker on the Victory Malt, but nothing there. Both have that similar kind of golden color. I didn't use any gelatin or any findings in this, so they still are a touch hazy, hazier than you'd probably want it to be for a lager. But they're not murky. They look they look like pretty delicious beers, actually.
Yeah, I'm looking at the photos right now. They look like Festbiers. They look delicious. They look identical. I mean, I'm with you. I'm like squinting my eyes at the picture right now. Maybe there's just a hair of a difference, or dark, slightly darker in the Victory Malt. But at 5%, 5% roasted barley, you're going to get a way darker beer. It's a 28 degree Lovabon, malt. And at 5%, you wouldn't expect it to have some crazy effect on the color. So if it's different, it's difficult to see at that usage rate. So to me, I'm going to say these beers look as near as identical as possible as they could,
Exactly. Again, I don't think the actual color of it, again, that low of a point, again, it's kind of the test of if I served you one and then brought it back based on color, you probably wouldn't be able to figure that out. But
yeah.
But then we have to drink the things, and then I have to figure out that if I serve me one and then somebody brought me the other one, would I be able to tell them apart? And so we kind of do this with our own semi-blind triangle tests that we kind of implement on ourselves, either through family members or through various methods. And I'll be honest with you, I got 1 out of 5. So apparently I couldn't even tell these beers apart and how they tasted or how they looked. And they were both kind of lovely, delicious Festbiers. And so I would gladly make this recipe over again.
So 1 out of 5. That's worse than random guessing. I mean, that is random guessing, but you really could not distinguish these beers. I didn't expect this. I've been using Victory Malt. Obviously, my expectation, not that I need it or want it, my expectation was that it has an impact at 5% usage rate, regardless of the style. That's why people use it the way that they do. The fact that you as the brewer, we're going to get into the blind taster results here in a minute, but the fact that you as the brewer who has experience with this malt, who knew everything about these beers, could not tell them apart at 5% usage rate was not in my expectation, in my brain. I did not think that was going to happen. I just, and to this day, like I still have recipes, I'm going through and looking at old recipes I want to brew now that I'm back to brewing again. I have Victory Malt in so many of them right at 5%. Is it even, it just blows my mind that you couldn't tell them apart. But again, it could be that your palate just sucks, Will.
Well, I had an interesting conversation the other day with a local pro brewer because I was really fortunate. We had a local pro brewer at our last brew club meeting, and he did a triangle test for me. Not this one, but a different one. And he said, well, he's like, it may be helpful to know the variable ahead of time. And I told him, it's like, yeah, you think that, but like me, I'm drinking these beers in my own triangle test, and I'm looking for like an extra biscuity thing. And the reality is that when you have that in your head, you're kind of eliminating some of those novel exploratory processes in your brain. And so by me already having this idea in my head, yeah, it could help if that was the actual difference, or that was what I was actually getting, what I was expecting. But what's nice about having these blind tasters is we've removed that kind of expectation. And so now they can use those novel processes in their brain to go and explore and see if they can figure out what exactly is going on here. And so that's why I think my data is interesting and fine and well and good, but it's a very biased set. And I'm kind of cutting myself off from those novel exploratory processes where, we had 21 participants in this one. And so it's pretty cool to see what these 21 people that had no idea what the variable was, just that they were drinking delicious Festbier, would get out of it.
Yeah. And so I agree 100% with everything you're saying. We tend to, though, trust people that we trust. And so if you tell me, I couldn't tell these beers apart, as much as I can't stand the fact that people like beg us to keep this thing in our articles, the My Impression section, it's still meaningful on some level. How many times do you go to a brew club meeting or you're sitting at a pub with somebody and you just kind of take them at their word when they say something tastes a certain way or whatever? So there is some value in that. But like you said, the blind taster results are where the money is at. That's going to be, where we get the best data, in my opinion. And so out of those 21 participants that you served these beers to in the triangle test, 12 of them would have had to identify the unique sample in order for us to say with any amount of confidence that there really does seem to be a meaningful difference between these beers, perceptibly speaking, right? Organoleptically speaking, that people can, there's something different about here that we can't explain by random chance. There seems to be more than randomness going on. Out of those 21, again, 12 expected, how many people actually got the triangle test right, picked the unique sample in the triangle test?
So we actually got 7 tasters to pick the unique sample, which if you do 21 over 7, you'll see that that's exactly or 7 over 21. You'll see that that's exactly a third of people, right at 33%, exactly a third. So this is right in line with random guessing since we have 3 cups that we're serving them. And so tasters could not reliably tell these beers apart. And so we don't care about their preference data because they couldn't even tell them apart. So I guess it means that at least in this particular experiment, this particular beer, Victory Malt had no discernible impact as far as flavor goes.
This is one of those ones that actually, makes my brain glitch a little bit because I mentioned earlier that I went back and I was looking at a bunch of my old recipes that I would rebrew often to have on tap at home. I mean, probably over half of them, I didn't actually count the number, but probably over half of the 40 or so recipes that I reviewed had Victory Malt in it at about a 5% usage rate, give or take, like I said. Every single one of those recipes also had more than just pale malt or Pilsner malt. They had Munich malt, they had Vienna malt, they had some roasted grains, they had crystal malts, right? This right here, this experiment that we're talking about would suggest, obviously we're not going to brush with too broad of strokes here, But this would suggest that Victory Malt may not be doing what I think it's doing. It may not be contributing that nutty, toasty thing that is my goal in using it in the way that I thought it was. And that is a glitchy thing in my brain, because why then is a maltster, a malt company like Brees, who we have nothing but respect for, marketing it as doing this when people, including the brewer, can't tell it apart? Yes, we have to repeat this experiment. I do think for the next one, it would be better to do just all pale malt, all Pilsner malt, whatever, and then the Victory. But I don't know if we should go at a higher usage rate or not yet, because people use that 5% metric, every time. That's kind of the measure. I don't know. What are your thoughts? This one was really surprising to me.
I think it'd be kind of cool to turn around and do more of like an amber style lager and then try to go up with a 15 or 20% usage rate to see if like you could sleuth it out, because you're not going to be using that high of a rate of Victory Malt in most pale lagers anyways. And then also keep it at around 5%, and then maybe try to in a Helles or just like a simple, Pilsner malt beer where it's like, even if you did like kind of like what we do with the Hop Chronicles, where we're just making like I guess we call it an international pale lager, where it's just all Pilsner malt and a single hop, and then you just throw in that 5% or so Victory Malt on that just to see where it lands. Because honestly, it is really interesting, because if you go back and look at, because where I'm using Victory the most is in my pale lagers, because I am convinced that I'm getting that biscuity, crackery kind of flavor from it. And so that if I go back and look, I'm with you, when I look at almost all of my pale lager recipes, whether it's like a German Pils or a Helles or whatever it is, I'm adding this touch of Victory in there. And now when I'm doing recipe design, if I don't have the Victory Malt, I don't use it. I think I have one bag of Victory Malt in I think I have 5 pounds of it sitting somewhere. And I'm like, do I use it just to get rid of it at this point? Because I don't know that it actually makes any difference. Or do I just need to hold on to it so I can do some more of these experiments to figure out where it may actually make a difference? But like with my pale lagers now, I'm not really worried about adding Victory to it after this experiment. Because again, if you can't tell it in a Festbier, which I think it would have really kind of been a good, good spot to kind of feel it out at first, then really, if you can't taste it there, then what are the odds I'm going to be able to taste it in a Helles? And then if you start doing American, light lager, American lager, you don't really want much of that over the top biscuity flavor in there necessarily. You just want everything to get out of the way of what little Pilsner malt character that you have. So
right.
So where does this malt actually fit into my brewing process? And so unless I can get it at kind of a higher percentage in an amber or a darker lager or ale, or if maybe at a smaller percentage in a Helles, like if it's not hitting that mark there, then where does this fit into my brewing process? And that's really caused me to ask a whole lot of questions around that.
Yeah, it is. I'm with you. This is the kind of result that we would like. I'm not going to recommend people take what I'm saying now and apply it to their brewing and their thought process. These are the types of experiments that change the way I brew. This to me, and I'm not writing off Victory Malt. That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying though is that in this scenario, knowing how clean and controlled your brewing process was, how similar these beers were in every respect, we could say that it really the biggest difference was that one had 5% Victory Malt and the other one did not, and yet they tasted the same. That just, to me, I'm like. The reason I was excited to talk about this one of the reasons is that, again, I'm back into brewing, right? I ordered a whole bunch of grains. I got a bunch in my, they all arrived last week. And they're in my brewery in my garage, and I did not order Victory Malt. And, I'm sitting there thinking about it. Do I want to pick up 5 pounds just to have on hand? And I thought, I don't think so. I'm not convinced that it's having the impact that I thought it was. And that feeling is just weird. I don't mean to get all existential, but like, what is it doing? We have to test it out more. Now, I'm going to stop harping on this because I know that it's going to get taken the wrong way. We do have some reader comments. They're kind of in line with what you would think. People are saying, the first one comes from Todd, who says, I will say that this surprised me. Victory sticks out to me so badly, like a red-skinned peanut base note flavor, that I won't use it at all.
Yeah, so maybe red-skinned peanut base note is what I got in my 50% biscuit malt thing. I don't know, that may be there, because there's like an astringency to the red skinned on the peanuts, right? So maybe that's kind of where I got some of that flavor from. I don't know. So that's but again, like in smaller percentages, I've thought that I could taste it as more of a biscuity or just kind of insurance that I got that biscuity character into it. So to me, I don't know. Like I'm kind of with you that I was also surprised that I couldn't taste it. I don't know that I would use it if I thought it tasted as Redskin peanuts in a normal beer. But again, I too am also surprised, Todd.
Yo, I love those Redskin peanuts. I love peanuts. So if I got that flavor, at least I would feel confident that the Victory Malt was doing something. I've never gotten Redskin peanut base note flavor out of any beer that I've used Victory Malt in. So it makes me wonder if Todd is actually tasting Victory Malt or if it might be something else. I do get a very peanut buttery note from Maris Otter. I think that's a common description used with Maris Otter that I love. It's one of the reasons I used 50% of my grain bill in the beer that I brewed this weekend was Maris Otter. I love that flavor component. I don't get that from Victory. To me, at least what my brain conceived of the Victory Malt that I was using, it was toasty. Now I'm thinking that toasty might have just come from the base malts, but who knows? Next comment, final comment for this one comes from Finn Berger, who says, with twice as much Munich in there, I'm not surprised the Victory edition didn't make a noticeable difference. That doesn't make the experiment uninteresting, though. The fact that the experiment still isn't uninteresting. Thank you, Finn. Appreciate that. But what are your thoughts? We've already talked about it a bit. The fact that you used the Munich malt. He wasn't the only one. Finn wasn't the only one who commented, on the Munich malt inclusion in this recipe, and that maybe that got in the way. What are your thoughts on that?
So I mean, I kind of understand where he's coming from, but using some like kind of Munich 1, I think is Environment Munich 1's what I used, and so that's pretty standard in a lot of ale recipes, especially Festbier. But again, like Victory Malt 5% edition. Right here, this seems like the bread and butter of what you would put in a style such as this. And like I said, I kind of mentioned earlier that, if we did a German Pilsner, then people would complain it's too hoppy to tell the difference or too bitter. If we did a Helles, maybe that's kind of where it goes. But and then again, if you start doing 5% in your American lagers or American light lagers, is it even an American lager, American light lager anymore? Or are you starting to push into something else? And so again, so I don't know. I guess Helles may have been an okay, maybe slightly better choice. But again, I think this is kind of the bread and butter of where a lot of people are using it, is something like a Festbier that does have mostly Pilsner malt, maybe some Munich malt. And that 5% range seems pretty common in styles like this. So really, this is kind of a litmus test to myself to see if something that is my house recipe that I've made a bunch of times, is it going to make a difference here? And if it doesn't make a difference here, then where do I have this ingredient and where does that fit into my usage of it? And so I'm kind of, I think it's worth repeating in a lighter style like a Helles or International Pale Lager. I think it's worth repeating in that kind of style. But again, where does this malt fit into where I want to use it? And am I really getting out of it what I think I should be getting out of it? Or is Pilsner malt just kind of carrying that on its own?
Yeah. Yep. I'm with you. The way I'm going to say what I said earlier, most people are using Victory Malt in a similar capacity that you did in this experiment. They're not just using it when in beers that are all base malt with a little bit of Victory. They're using it along with other malts. And so this was a real life test, and in this case, make of it what you will. People couldn't tell apart a beer made with 5% Victory Malt to one that didn't have Victory in it at all. That would suggest one of two things: that Victory Malt's not doing anything, or at 5% usage rate, it's not doing much. Maybe at 10%, maybe at 15% it does, but when you get to that point, is it a pleasurable experience? I don't know, but I do look forward to future experiments. That is all the time we've got for this episode. I think we've beat Victory Malt to death on this one. Don't forget to check out the rad brewing content Martin is creating over at The Brewlosophy Show, which you can subscribe to at youtube.com/@thebrewlosophy show. That is the @ symbol followed by The Brewlosophy Show with no umlaut. And as always, you can read more about the experiment we discussed by clicking the link to the article on brewlosophy.com in the description of this episode. The Brewlosophy Podcast is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors, as well as all of our rad listeners. We seriously could not do this without you. Cheers to everyone who has subscribed and left a review of our show. It makes a huge difference. If you haven't yet, please consider doing so. Head over to brewlosophy.com/support to view a list of ways you can easily help us to continue producing this podcast. If you want a reward for your support, visit patreon.com/brewlosophy. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Brewlosophy Podcast. Until then, think beer.
Start off the morning with some hot tea, lemon and honey, cause it soothes my throat. Put some herb in the bowl, yeah, it's homegrown. Ain't gotta go through the middleman no more.